Hi folks, welcome back. Thank you for watching. Please do hit subscribe if you haven't done so yet. It really does help when you do that. So today folks, you might have seen my video last week where I was essentially saying goodbye to an old Ashdown half stack that I'd owned for about 10 years and never really used. And in that video I said that I was going to be part exchanging it the day after for a different amp. Now that amp is sat over my shoulder there, and you'll be able to tell the manufacturer from a mile off because of course it is fluorescent orange. Now this amp head is an orange custom shop Retro 50. Now I'm going to tell you the story about how and why I became interested in this amp. If you just want to hear me playing it, I'll put a timestamp on screen now to where you can skip straight to the playing, and it will also be in the YouTube slider bar. So if you want to skip this intro and just get straight to the sounds, that's absolutely fine. But essentially Orange are a very interesting amplifier company. They're very old in terms of their heritage. They came about in the late 60s at the same sort of time as Marshall and High Watt and brands like that. But Orange have two pretty different halves to their identity. The first half is the old school Orange sound from the late 60s, early 70s, especially an amp series that became known as the Picks Only series, because instead of writing bass, middle, treble, gain, volume, they just kind of gave you pictograms that you had to decipher to work out how the amp worked, which was kind of fun. Now those old school Orange amps were rockers essentially. Most were EL34 and they were very British voiced. So they were kind of different to the Marshall amps of the day, because Marshall amps traditionally had quite a kind of bite and fizz in the upper mid-range, whereas the old school Orange amps were known for being a lot thicker in the lower mid-range. So they were definitely British voiced, they were definitely ballpark to the Marshalls of the day, but they just had a slightly different mid-emphasis which kind of set them apart. Now the modern Orange sound, they still make a few amps that are kind of based on that old school philosophy, but they're more commonly known nowadays for higher gain metal amps. So Jim Root from Slipknot has a signature head, and they do the Tiny Terror and the Thunderverb and things like that, and they're all pretty different from the old school Orange amps. So they have those two halves of their identity, and there's no award for guessing which of those halves I'm most interested in. Now, I was looking around at amps and I was on a website of a guitar shop here in the UK called Peach Guitars, which I'm sure many of you will know. They have a great YouTube channel. I think the chap that does the videos is called Jack. He's an incredible player, makes brilliant videos. And they're also the UK dealer for Dr. Z amps. And if you watch this channel a lot, you'll know I'm a big fan of Dr. Z. And I was on their website dribbling over the new Dr. Z Z Master, the 310 Bandmaster Joe Walsh signature amp thing, which is way more than I can afford. But I also clicked onto their used amp section, and they have an amp in there, because they still have it, which was an Orange head. And essentially what it is one of the 40th anniversary custom shop heads, which is super rare, very collectible, and it's from the series that became known as the Girl's Name series, because all of those 40 amps were slightly different from each other, and instead of being given a serial number, they were each given an individual girl's name. I think that one was called Cecilia from memory. Now they wanted £4,000 for that amp, which is way more than I could ever think of spending. But it got me interested in looking at Orange amps, because recently I've wanted to get my hands on an amp that is British voiced, because that's the sound I'm into, custom shop, sort of hand-wired, boutique-y type thing, because that's the sort of thing I like, but also one that has a master volume, because all of the other amps I have here are Class A non-master volume combos, which I love. I love the simplicity of just having one knob and you turn it up nice and loud to the point where it starts to crunch up and all the good stuff. But when you're using them for shooting demo videos like I do most of the time, if you're cranking a non-master volume amp in a very small room and you're doing a few takes of a video, or you're shooting a few videos in a day, it will give you a headache very quickly, because those amps are ear-splittingly loud. So I've kind of wanted an amp that I can gain up and then throttle back a bit with a master volume. Now this Orange head kind of fit the bill on paper, at least, aside from the fact it didn't have a master volume. So that piqued my interest, and I began to look at what other heads Orange make and have made in the past. And essentially, when Orange introduced their custom shop back in 2002, I think it was, they led with two hand-wired sort of flagship models. The AD50, which was kind of based on the more modern, tight in the low end, high gain Orange sound, but also the Retro 50, which was kind of a greatest hits of the old picks only amp circuits. So it looked exactly what I was after. It was custom shop, hand-wired on terminal board, which looked amazing. It had the master volume. It didn't have an effects loop, which is great because I don't like them. And the only two bits of functionality it gave you, aside from being just single channel volume and gain and a 3-band EQ, was you could switch the power section from 30 watt class A mode into 50 watt class AB mode for a slightly different response and voicing. And you could also use one of Orange's foot switches. Now these are kind of generic switches they make that work with all of their amps, but they do a different function depending on what the amp is. And in the Retro 50, it drops the tone stack out. So it gives you more gain, more volume, and just a super fat feedbacking middle-y sound for, you know, a sort of lead boost, I suppose. So I got my hands on one of these as well. So I became really interested in the Retro 50. I did a lot of reading. There aren't that many demos of them on YouTube, at least ones where you can really hear what the amp's doing. But essentially I found one second hand, because I discontinued them in 2013, I think, up at a guitar shop in Sheffield. Now, they wouldn't post the amp down to me, and the only way I could really justify driving up there and back again, because it's like a 400-mile round trip for me here in Somerset, was if I could offload that old Ashdown half stack at the same time, because that thing was absolutely enormous, it weighed a ton, and no courier would touch it with a barge pole. So that's exactly what I did last week. I drove the Ashdown up to Sheffield and drove back with the Retro 50. So today I wanted to show you a few things that this amp can do. I've paired it up with my Zilla Studio Pro cab, which looks like a Marshall Blues Breaker. It's not, it's a 2x12 made by Zilla. And in this last week, I've really been experimenting with different speaker choices. And I tried some Alnicos in there, some ceramics, a Neo. And what I've discovered about the Retro 50 is it loves ceramic speakers. So the pairing I've settled on are a Fane F70 and a Warehouse Invader 50, which is kind of a higher powered greenback type thing. And that combination really works well with the Retro 50. So today, folks, I'm just going to play a few things through it with a few different guitars. I'm not going to use any pedals. I will kick the foot switch in to drop the tone stack out at a few points. I'll show you on screen when I'm doing that. And I'm just going to experiment with running the amp at different levels of gain with the master high, the master low, and just put it through its paces to see what tones we can coax out of it. So without further ado, folks, let's get citrusy. there we are, folks. Now, please do comment underneath, let me know what you were thinking of the tones today. I love chatting nerdy guitar stuff with you folks in the comment sections. But for me and my personal tastes, I think that amp sounds absolutely stellar. And one thing I really love about it is it's different enough from my other amps to warrant owning it, but it's not so different that I don't like it. It's definitely British voiced, it's definitely rooted in classic rock world, which is where I live. It just sounds a little bit different from any other amp I've got, which is exactly what I was after. It definitely has that old school orange sound to it. Now, as I said at the start of the video, there aren't many demos of this amp on YouTube that really show how it sounds. So when I was researching it and trying to decide whether to go for it, because obviously it was 200 miles away, I couldn't go and try it out, I was very reliant on reading forums. And there was two things people were saying about the Retro 50, one of which kept putting me off. And I'm very glad I didn't let it, because it's simply not true. The first thing people were saying was the Retro 50 is a very dark sounding amp. And I like bright sounding amps with a lot of clarity and definition. Now, at no point today, even at the start of the video with the Strat, where I had it set really bright and glassy, in that excerpt, the treble was at like 1 o'clock. So there was plenty of treble still to go. It is not a dark sounding amp whatsoever. So I'm very, very glad I didn't listen to the forum goers there. But the other thing people kept saying about it was there really isn't much gain in it. Now, with the Tele today, that was verging on fuzz territory. It was super gnarly and compressed and raspy, and I had the gain at 2 o'clock. So there was plenty of gain still to go. And in terms of classic rock and the sort of tones I like, it has way more gain than I could ever want or need. So it is not a low gain amp. Now, compared to the modern orange amps, it might be a little lower in gain than that, for sure, but it is not a low gain amp overall. So again, I think the forum goers were definitely wrong on that front. Now, one thing that I have noticed about this amp, which is true for all tube amps, is with the master volume, you can run it low at kind of bedroom levels and turn the gain up, and it sounds really, really good. But as you turn the master up, the whole amp comes alive. So when you get it above, I know, 12, 2 o'clock, something like that, the transformer starts working, the output tubes start working, the speakers start compressing, and it just sounds absolutely colossal. So it's really great for that. I love having the master volume. I'm still going to run the amp nice and loud when using it for demo videos, but just being able to shelve those few dB off the top end of it, that's going to make it so much better for me demoing pedals in this room. Because if you're demoing something like a range master, you have to have the amp turned up to the point where it's compressing. So being able to dial that in at slightly more civilian volumes is going to save my ears no end. So I am absolutely blown away by this amp. I absolutely love it, especially with this speaker pairing. Sounds phenomenal. But as I said, folks, please do comment underneath. Let me know what you think of the Retro 50. I love getting your thoughts and opinions in the comment section. But for now, thank you ever so much for watching, folks. I hope this video was interesting and useful for you. Please do carry on subscribing. I know I always say it, but it makes a huge difference when you subscribe. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.